welcome back. And in this segment, we're going to continue our discussion about essential oils, but I'm actually going to open up several related topics. As you know, in these presentations, I'm always looking for a way to talk about things other than essential oils or putting essential oils into a much bigger context. So I'm going to be sharing some thoughts about the underlying philosophy of what we do at Floracopeia and why. What was the motivating inspiration behind Floracopeia, and still is. And the subject can be summed up very simply. Floracopeia is about the integration of medicine, spirituality, and ecology. And this is something that has developed in my own perception through the study of classical Asian medicine. And because of that background and because of its applications to, first of all, my clinical practice, and then second to the world of plant medicine, and then third to the application of that to the larger field of agriculture, sustainable ecological agriculture specifically. These three subjects have integrated themselves in my consciousness, and it's very important to think about plant medicine in this particular way, because plant medicine is inherently spiritual by nature, and plant medicine is also inherently ecological by nature. So I wanted to share some thoughts about what this integration of these three apparently separate subjects really represents, and why it's very important that we think about the integration of these three topics. Now, before we get started, I actually wanted to go back to something that I left you with last week, and that was the Himalayan Juniper. And you'll remember that I didn't actually have the oil with me. And thank you to those of you who have purchased it. And thank you to everybody for supporting our little effort here at the integration of medicine, spirituality, and ecology. That's what this represents right here, all right? This Himalayan juniper represents that vision. It represents the vision of integrating medicine, ecology, and spirituality. And I will do a little demonstration of what that integration actually looks like. And we have done this before, and those of you who are aware of my work, you know about this little contemplative aromatherapy practice. And that in itself tells us a lot about how these three subjects are all interconnected. So with this Himalayan juniper, which by the way I'm very pleased with, and it should be pleasing to everybody, it's quite unique. But I wanted to show you a few things just as an example of how easy it is to approach herbal medicine with spiritual dimensions and ecological dimensions. And the same is true if we start from any of the other points. You know, I frequently tell you about the ecological side of the story, but that's inherently spiritual and medical also. And sometimes I start from a spiritual standpoint, but that's inherently medical and ecological. So I have the Himalayan juniper on the perfume strip here. And first of all, I want to just point out that breathing is medical, spiritual, and ecological. So we take a deep breath, and just the fact that we are inhaling gives us an entry point into spiritual practice, you see. And we can transform the experience of aromatherapy into a meditation. And the contemplative study of fragrance is actually, if we think about it in classical terms, if we're really paying close, mindful attention to something, especially if we're really looking at what are the components that are inside this fragrance, what we're really doing is practicing Vipassana meditation. Now, Vipassana meditation is translated as insight meditation or mindfulness meditation, but a deeper level of meaning from the original Pali language is to take apart, you see. So what we're doing when we do Vipassana meditation is we're taking apart reality in our mind and we're analyzing it very carefully. So if I'm going to inhale this aroma of the wonderful Himalayan juniper, then I'm going to receive some medical benefits. It's uplifting, it's energizing, it's good for the mind, it's good for the respiratory system, just to breathe it, okay? So that's the medical. But if I am approaching it very mindfully, and I'm actually studying it to take apart what's inside of it by recognizing the various aromatic notes that are in there, then that's practicing Vipassana, using one of the sense organs. And therefore, it becomes a meditation to pay attention to botanical medicine. So right there is medicine integrated with spirituality. And then, of course, there's the entire story about where the plants are harvested and the people it supports and the ecosystems and all of that. That's ecology. So I suggested for everybody last week that you might want to take some notes and see how does this strike you in terms of its aromatic profile. So what I would say is that, first of all, it has the usual kinds of coniferous top notes, okay, and middle notes. But it's a very complex aroma. It actually has a little bit of honey aroma, a little bit of maybe even leather, okay? But it's also fruity. And the coniferous notes are actually fairly complex, and that's a sign that it's a really nice conifer oil, because the story behind it is that there's very little wood material in it. And the wood material, the more wood that goes into the distillation of conifer oil, the lower the quality. The more of the leaf material that can be hand sorted out, which is what this is, the higher the quality of the oil. And that's what makes it really light and fresh, whereas the wood makes it smell more like turpentine and resinous. So there is a sweetness, some sweet fruit notes that are in here. But at the same time, it does have that kind of underlying resinous quality that is there because it's a conifer. So pine, of course, is here, pine notes, and freshness, and green notes. It's an interesting thing to talk about perfumery and aromatherapy in terms of colors and musical notes, but that is something that is there. It's an oil that smells green. So the general impression then, in terms of the therapeutics, is that it produces energy. The conifers produce energy, mental energy, respiratory energy, and it also has a kind of cleansing effect. And that's part of what I shared with you last week about the cultural use of the juniper as an incense primarily. So as we get into, so the top note is basically the lightest note that comes out first, but then as you start to go deeper into it, both with your concentration and as it starts to dry out a little bit, that's where the wood notes tend to come out, and the resin parts. And those are here, but what makes this oil really special in my mind, in my experience, is that this is much lighter overall and sweeter and fresher and greener than a typical juniper type of oil. So that's just a few simple observations to get us started, and maybe you concur with those descriptions, those aromatic profiles. But what I wanted to share in terms of this integration of medicine, ecology, and spirituality is that every time we do a contemplative study of an essential oil, and this is how I recommend we approach all botanical medicine, is that we approach all botanical medicine with a high degree of mindfulness. And that changes our relationship to plant medicine, and that will change our relationship to plants, and that will change our relationship to nature. So what I have been really appreciating and teaching and contemplating for quite a long time is, what is the role of spiritual practice in relation to plant medicine? Now, obviously, there's a lot of integrated areas that we can see. Like if we're talking about burning a piece of frankincense in a ceremony and a ritual to enhance our meditation, well, that's obviously using a plant in a kind of spiritual context. But it's very easy for people to just use herbal medicine allopathically. And there is a big movement actually in certain aspects of natural medicine to really think in a reductionistic kind of way about the compounds in the plants and about the symptomatic use of a product. That, turmeric equals inflammation. This type of thing. And the way that we get out of that is to understand that the more we consciously interact with the plant, that a couple of really important things happen. First of all, we become much more aware of what the plant is doing. And it's a really curious thing, but the more aware we are of the plant, the more effective its actions are on us. And that's a really intriguing thing. So let me just give you an example when it comes to using herbal medicine, say either aromatherapy or taking something internally. Now, if we're just running around and we just swallow a handful of products, okay, herbal products, our level of participation with those plants is very minimal. Now, they will still do something physiologically, but let's just say that we prepare a tea very in a meditative kind of way. We smell its fragrance, and then we sit down and we drink the tea calmly, and we pay attention very closely to the fragrance and the taste, and then we start to pay attention closely to the body sensations that it's producing. Well, there is an increase actually in the potency of the herbs, and this is very curious. Why is it that using botanical medicine more mindfully increases its effectiveness? All right. Now, to what degree and confirmation of this, I don't actually know. I'm just sharing with you personal experience and the experience of many, many people over the years. But here is a simple example of what mindfulness does. And we can call mindfulness attentional prana. In other words, we are focusing the energy of the mind on something. And the energy of the mind does something physiologically. And here's a simple example, and this is based on biofeedback. We can learn very easily to just close our eyes and feel the hand. And simply by putting our attention on the hand, within a few seconds, the attention actually begins to change the circulation in the hand. And the hand begins to feel different. And this can be measured. That circulation improves, the galvanic skin response changes, okay? In other words, we are altering the physiology just in the hand, improving its circulation, relaxing it, increasing blood flow, and so forth, using nothing but our own attention. Now, think about the implications of that. If we were to expand this throughout the entire body, that would mean that ultimately, if our attention was strong enough, we could control our physiology, you see. Now, there's a lot of aspects of physiology that we need the plant medicine for. And as a matter of fact, I would say we need plant medicine for virtually everything. There's very little of our physiology that we can actually control. But what we're talking about is using plants to help our physiology, but then helping them do their work by paying more close attention to them. So this is a very simple example of integrating meditation into taking botanical medicine to enhance its effectiveness and power. But I would like to go back to the introduction, and I said that some of these topics are the basis, the vision of Floracopeia. And this came out of my clinical work. So what does it actually mean to integrate medicine, ecology, and spirituality? So a starting point for me in terms of my own learning, education, and the process of starting to understand this topic at a deeper level was a kind of insight or a revelation that I had when I was studying Chinese and Ayurvedic medicine. And those systems are based on the terminology of the biosphere. All right, what does that mean, the terminology of the biosphere? Well, if you are doing pulse diagnosis in Chinese medicine, you are talking about things like liver fire, okay, liver wind, all right? You're talking about dampness, you're talking about dryness, okay, you're talking about stagnation. So this is inherent. This is the language of Ayurveda. This is the language of Chinese medicine. But the language of Chinese medicine and Ayurvedic medicine is the language of nature. It's the language of the biosphere. So this was something that was not introduced to me in my studies. I was never told by my teachers that this is the language of ecophysiology that you are learning, all right? But when I realized that these classical Asian medical systems were talking about the activity of the planetary biosphere inside the microcosm of the human body, then suddenly a lot of things started to make more sense. And one of the things that happened from that was that I could start to see the parallels then between disturbances in the biosphere of the planet and disturbances of the biosphere of the human body. And I started to see that the physiological functions in the body are completely biologically interwoven with the biological functions of the ecosphere of the planet. Now, this is something that I think is going to be part of a great awakening that's starting to happen now, because we must come to a place of realizing that we are completely inseparable from the biosphere of the earth, all right? And this inseparability of the biosphere and the human body is spiritual in nature also, okay? So right there, if we're talking about, let's look at a human being in relation to the planetary biosphere. What does it mean that we need food from the earth? What does it mean that we need to drink water? What does it mean that we need breathable air? Okay. What does it mean that we are dependent on the biosphere for our existence? How is it that the human body is biologically completely inseparable from the biosphere? Okay. And what does it mean if the biosphere continues to break down? So all of these things are talking about the relationship then between human health, which is medicine, and the ecosystems. But that process is profoundly spiritual. So let me explain a little bit more. As you can see, today's talk is a bit more philosophical, but it's something very important to consider, not just about the work that we're doing at Floracopeia, but just in terms of our own spiritual practice as well. So let's just take the process of breathing, okay? So the process of breathing is linked, of course, to the air element. And the air element is described in Ayurvedic medicine as one of the 5 elements. And so if we are talking about a medical diagnosis, we frequently find that the air element is disturbed in the human body. And that the air element is not just in the human body, it's in the atmosphere, and it's completely connected to the plants. Okay. So what's interesting then, a very simple kind of observation about biological unity is that we are breathing together with plants. And this is an opposite gaseous exchange where the plants are basically absorbing carbon dioxide and releasing oxygen, and humans are doing the opposite. And that there's a biological, physiological reason for that. So we can look at any aspect of human anatomy, any aspect of human physiology, and we can see this kind of inseparable biological unity with the environment around us. Now, why is that important to understand? Well, let's just take a recent event, a recent big global event, the pandemic, okay, of the SARS-CoV-2 virus, okay, COVID-19. Well, this is linked, like all pandemics, to conditions in the environment, all right? And one of the things that's going to be happening as the biosphere continues to become more degraded and out of balance, and this is a primary discussion in scientific circles, in virology and epidemiology, and that is that there are a lot of toxins that are in the soil and in animals that will be coming out because of the disturbance, all right? And so we can look at that as one aspect of what is the impact of environmental health on human health. All right, well, we can see it in all kinds of ways, all right? We can see the impact of agricultural toxins, that's environmental health. We can see the impact of global warming. We can see the impact of microbial spreading, okay? So all of these things that are happening in the biosphere are impacting human health, and they're going to be impacting human health even more. So what do we do about all of this? I think, and this is going back to the vision of Floracopeia, I think that we need to understand this inseparability between our individual health and the health of the biosphere. And in order to understand it, we have to cultivate a kind of sensitivity to the biosphere inside the body first, which then makes us more sensitive to the environment of the earth, and that becomes a spiritual practice. So if we look at the language of classical Ayurvedic and Chinese medicine, we see that, okay, it's talking about earth, water, fire, air, space. It's talking about prana and chi. It's talking about cosmological energies and elements. Now, here's an interesting aspect of this integration of medicine, ecology, and spirituality, and that is, if you study classical Asian medical systems, you find that the medical systems were inseparable from the spiritual lineages, okay? And those spiritual lineages and the medical systems both use the language of nature, all right? So that's where classical Asian medicine came from, and those three things were inseparable originally. Now they are very separated into different things. So we study Chinese medicine, we learn herbs, we learn acupuncture. There's very little integration into the classical spiritual practices unless you want to go and study Qigong on your own, all right? But originally, these systems of spirituality and medicine were combined, and the language was based on the observations of nature. So what I am personally very interested in and have focused on a lot in my teachings, and is the basis of Floracopeia, is bringing those three threads, those three lineages back together again so we can understand that healing is inherently spiritual and ecological. The ecological situation in the world is inherently medical and spiritual, okay? So let's look at another aspect here very, very briefly, and that is, what if we take the language of the 5 elements? So I've given you an example with the perfume strip and contemplative aromatherapy, but what if we do that practice inside the body? And what if we were to do Vipassana meditation in a classical way of just mindfulness of body sensations as taught 2,500 years ago by Buddha, okay? One of the main ways that Vipassana was taught was to observe the 5 elements. So in Ayurveda and Chinese medicine, we learn 5 elements from a medical standpoint. How are they behaving? Is there excess water? Is there excess fire? Is there deficiency of earth? We learn the 5 elements, but what if we actually apply that to a meditation practice and we learn to feel the body sensations of earth? And we learn to feel the body sensations of water, and we learn to feel the body sensations of fire. And we go deeply into that, taking apart. What will we discover? Well, let's just look at it very simply. We can analyze the body, and this can be a very simple intellectual exercise, not just a meditative exercise. But we can just say, well, what part of the body actually belongs to me? You see, what is the body? It's basically just a bag, and it's full of water, and it's warmed by combusting sunlight, and it's breathing together with the plants as part of that combustion. And there is a life force that is circulating everything. But we have no control over any part of that whatsoever, you see. There's only one thing that we can control in the human body, and that is the voluntary muscles. Everything else happens for us. And so there's a profound intelligence that's operating everything, and we don't think about it. We don't even know what it's doing. We don't understand it, okay? And so here we are, and a very fundamental spiritual question then arises. Just by using the language of classical Asian medicine to study what the body is, and that is, well, who am I? Who am I? I'm a bag of water that's animated by this profound intelligence of nature, and I'm breathing together with the plants, and I'm combusting sunlight. Well, who am I in the middle of all of that? Well, that's where the study of the 5 elements becomes very spiritual. But then, what happens when we actually do these practices and we spend some time breathing together consciously with the plants? What happens when we use the terminology of classical Asian medicine, apply it as a mindfulness practice with a very little amount of effort? The most common thing that happens, and I'm sharing this with you after years and years of teaching these practices to thousands and thousands of people, the most basic thing that happens is that we are able to temporarily suspend the sensation of separateness biologically. If we are meditating on breathing together with plants, we very quickly can enter into a state of expanded sensation of self, where we actually feel the boundaries dissolving, and we can actually start to feel the environment around us, because elementally there is no separation. So the air element that comes into the lungs and then circulates around and then goes back out, that is a unified field of element that is all around us, that everybody else and all living things are all participating with. So what we are doing then is meditating on that which unifies us together, as opposed to my own separate sense of self, all right? So if we are meditating on these unifying elements, what happens to our consciousness? We become very sensitive to our biological unity. And what benefit does sensitivity to biological unity have now, in this particular time in human history? I think that without sensitivity to biological unity, there's going to be a pretty significant question about our survival as a species, okay? Now, what if the conditions of the earth are already too degraded anyway? Okay, what if we actually cannot reverse global warming, if things have gone too far? Well, then the question arises, what is the purpose of a human life? What is most meaningful to do with a human life? And I think that on a relative basis, one of the things that is very meaningful for me is caring for others through practicing healing arts. And the primary way that I do it is using plant medicine, you see. So using our life in a very meaningful way at the end of the world. Well, okay, it's better than falling into depression and anxiety. So what I see is that the crisis that we are in now, and it is well known that a huge percentage of humanity feels eco-despair, all right, and feels a sense of hopelessness about the future. But the future has never been certain in any generation. And it always goes back to what are we going to do now with the life that we have? And so for me, it's a question of meaning, okay? Rather than trying to save the world, it's a question of basically how can I use my life in a meaningful way? And I'll just share personally that besides practicing medicine, using natural medicine, which is reconnecting people back to nature, that is very meaningful for me to feel my biological unity with things around me, because it helps me to understand that I am part of nature. I am part of everything. So I'll just leave you here with a couple of very simple meditations that you might like to do moving forward. And these are practices that you can do for the rest of your life, and there's no end to how deep they are. These are things that I practice myself that are based on this integration of medicine, spirituality, and ecology. So one is listening to the heart, all right? I learned this originally by learning pulse diagnosis in Chinese and Ayurvedic medicine. It's done this way where you listen to other people's pulses, but I learned that, so after listening to tens of thousands of people's pulses, I suddenly realized, oh, I can listen to mine also. And so I started listening to my heartbeat. And then I started discovering all kinds of things inside the heartbeat. One of them is that the pulsation of the heart is actually circulating the 5 elements through the body. And you can feel this. Take your pulse before you eat a meal, and then take your pulse after you eat a meal. And you'll notice that the pulse is different. And what you're noticing is that there's a fullness of the earth element from the food that we ate, okay? So we eat food from the earth, it moves around, and then it goes out. And we can feel that. Now, what does that mean? It means that our circulatory system actually has a kind of nourishment that's filling it up. And that means that the earth element as nutrients in the blood are circulating through the center of the heart. So what that means is that if we're listening to the heartbeat, we can actually feel the food circulating as nutrients through the heart, okay? And that means that we are biologically connected to the earth element. And the same with water. What is blood? It's mostly water, all right? And so if we're listening to the heartbeat, then what we are feeling is water from rain or the rivers or streams or springs that we take in and we drink it, and it moves around and it moves through the heart. And so water is pulsating through the heart. Now that water that's pulsating through the heart is the same water that's pulsating through the entire circulatory system, but that's the same water that we took in whatever drinks we had, but that's the same water that came from the rain and the rivers, you see. And so if we are feeling the heartbeat and we are feeling the water element that's flowing through the center of the heart, we are feeling our biological inseparability with water everywhere. And we can do the same with sunlight. The body is 98.6 degrees. We can feel that warmth. That is sunlight combusting in the cells. And then we are breathing, and we are breathing from the atmosphere that all living things are sharing together. And that's moving through the center of the heart. And the heart is a space that contains all of it, you see? So there we have the system of earth, water, fire, air, and space. And it is in every heartbeat, and every heartbeat is an opportunity to feel how we are connected intimately to everything. Okay, well, I could go on for quite a while. I'm just getting warmed up, actually, but let me pause here and see if anybody has anything that they would like to comment on. All right, so looks like everybody is thinking about things, and thank you for thinking about this subject, and I hope that you find it interesting. I'll just mention also that for those of you who don't know that I offer consultations, and the consultations are also medical and spiritual by nature. A lot of people talk to me about spiritual issues, and of course there's a lot of conversations about the vaccine and about immunity and so forth, and so I'll just mention my consultation site, which is Crow Consultations, just like it sounds, crowconsultations.com. And for those of you who have been contacting me through that site and have come for consultations, thank you very much. A last thing here, I'm being reminded that we have a sale going on over at Floracopeia. And I'll give you a little discount code, Nourish25. Nourish25, our little discount for skincare and hair care sale right now. That's obviously a little bit of a different topic than the integration of spirituality, medicine, and ecology, but really it's all part of the same vision and the mission. So with that, I will sign off for now. I hope that you have enjoyed this more philosophical sort of approach to things. And we will be continuing with our exploration of essential oils in a more focused kind of way. Next week, we are starting a series of presentations for fall wellness, immune boosting, antimicrobial powers, and so forth. And so with that, I will just say thank you again for your interest in this very important subject. Thank you for attending, either live or during the week. And thank you, everybody, for your support for what we are doing. So have a good week.